If being naked was the norm, what would be the worst job? Stripper. I love the idea that strippers would become dressers and would slowly get dressed into a regular business outfit. I wish there was a club like this out there. I'd love to come out of the dressing room naked and slowly, sensually put on clothes. Me for Halloween I can slowly, sensually get dressed as a business T-Rex. Also, I'd actually have somewhere to put my money instead of hurriedly shoving it into my titties as the next dancer is walking on stage. I think the best stripper I've ever seen live didn't even get naked on her first song. She just pole danced and was super agile. It was beautiful and mesmerizing. This change would just require strippers to up their effort, since just being naked wouldn't be enough. I think it still thrives as a career, but would be much more impressive overall. MotoGP racer. This I feel is the correct answer compared to most of the other top comments. No. Any rational person isn't going to work with molten metals or otherwise and not have any form of protection. Even if clothlessness is the norm, it only takes the one poor soul who gets some important bits scorched to realize, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this butt naked. Working in the sewers, assuming protective gear isn't allowed. Protective gear isn't the norm. You would probably still wear protective gear when needed. Why would that change? It's not normal to walk around in day-to-day life in protective gear. However, when you need it, you put it on. I would certainly envision even with day-to-day being naked as normal, you would still wear NBC gear. The military would probably have boots still, and sewer workers would wear the gear necessary for the job. All that bacteria and viruses that could end up in you. Especially if your private part was exposed, you would end up with severe infections there, as well as that being a gateway for viruses of all kinds. Plus, you are obviously more likely to get injured easier and even more badly. Getting cut or scraped or bruised. Like, people don't understand that clothing isn't just a modesty practice. It genuinely aids and protects you from getting harmed badly. All you have to do is watch naked and afraid to know how important clothing is. Unsanitary activity is normalized all the time. Think about handshakes, going to work sick, how long food stays, how few people wash their hands after the toilet. Nasty stanks eating would be normalized too. Favk. The Romans used a communal sponge that they might rinse off instead of TP, and their culture lasted centuries. Sure, more people would get sick and even die, but that doesn't move a society without some leader or greater understanding fixing it. For an example, read up on Jon Snow and cholera. Years to spread the idea we shouldn't upstream from our water. Electrician. I have a friend who's an electrician, and he quite often needs to go into people's roofs to set up or repair wiring. Those roofs are filled with spiders, webs, and God knows what else. So imagine you're naked, getting webs and spiders all over you. And you'd get so much dirt all over you. It's seriously, if that much dirt goes in your urethra, which would be possible in this case being naked and all, you could get a UTI. This would honestly be normalized, like someone acting awkward around someone they like or blushing a bit. Like, it may be called out, but probably in a more teasing and flattering way. Plus, guys seeing girls naked constantly probably limits the usual attraction. Like when you watch so much porn that it kind of diminishes the appeal of seeing naked women. Laboratory worker. I've worked in a few labs. In the first two, we had special things we had to wear to protect what we were working on from contamination from our body. The contamination levels would be through the roof. Nothing could be done sterilely. My current lab wears PP, lab coats, long socks, long pants, etc. to protect us from what we are working on. We have to liquidy feces in a hood. Accidentally splattering liquid feces on your naked body is far worse than spilling it on your lab coat. Plus, we also work with potent chemicals. It wouldn't be good. Then, if being naked were the norm, people would still wear PPE. People here don't understand the question and respond like it'd be mandatory for everyone. I wanted to say that a few answers like school workers were good, but I imagine a society without clothes would have different morals and habits, so maybe it wouldn't be such big a deal as in our world. I wish this was included in the topic. It's not like protective courting would be prohibited. Everyone would be naked all the time unless they needed specialty pay. So seeing people naked all the time wouldn't be instant boner material in schools. And seeing a naked old person on TV wouldn't be any more uncomfortable than seeing a fully dressed old person on TV now. So many answers that don't take this into consideration. There would absolutely be jobs that would stick more to do due to interacting with naked people and dealing with bodily functions, but even then, it would be normal. Couch cleaners would have their work cut out for them more than now for sure, for example. But something like welding isn't going to be worse. If it was the norm, then seeing a naked body would not be a problem as it would be normal. And even if naked would be the norm, protective gear can still exist. So I don't know, riding instructor, you would still have a helmet and boots, but you will get a pounding from all the. For most jobs, you wear something different than what you normally would if you weren't working. Welders don't wear aprons and masks when they aren't working. Baristas don't wear their dumb visors and branded shirts when they aren't working. And teachers don't wear what they wear when they aren't at work. If being naked was the norm, the socially unacceptable jobs to be naked at would suddenly be socially acceptable, and people would still wear protective gear to prevent their naked selves from being injured. I insulated the underside of mobile homes that had been in place for years, once only for one day. I had roughly 18 inches to wriggle through, and the cat shirt and spiders were abundant, to put it mildly. Add the fact that every third unit had water damage at some point, so mold was also a factor. Had I been naked, I think I would be near dead after just a day. Claustrophobia, ammonia fumes, mold in my delicate bits. Not nice. Oh my God, this reminds me of the time I went to the ER for food poisoning. While I was there, this guy walked in bleeding at his crotch area because of an incident cutting planks of wood with circuit saw, injuring his family jewels. I would say, whatever this guy's job was would be one of the worst jobs. A lot of things there are assuming PPE would also be removed for some reason, assuming we all still wear the PPE so we don't hurt ourselves. I would say, maybe not the worst, but any job where people sit, theater, Uber driver would stick in a new way. You know, there would be the occasional skid mark on the seats that you would have to clean. Not an answer, but I do wonder how our lives in general would be different. Would porn industry cease to exist since there's no longer a demand? Would body shaming go away as we get more realistic about the wide spectrum that exists? Would we become desensitized to UL attraction? You don't take into consideration that even if being naked was the norm, people wouldn't not wear protective gear. Taking that into consideration, I'm gonna go a little outside the box and say stripper. I don't think that business would last too long with the mystique being taken away. I think common sense PPE would still be in play for jobs like welding, cooking, full body hairnet, or mechanist. So ignoring those professions that will need PPE, I would say middle school teachers. Younger kids would just accept it. High schoolers are almost adults, but middle school kids are the worst when it comes to judging and bullying. IMO. The answers seem to be in two categories: jobs that would be dangerous without protective gear, or jobs that would be embarrassing if we were naked. But if everyone was naked all the time, there would be no shame. Who is to say that there wouldn't still be protective gear with these dangerous jobs? All of that considered, I would say daycare worker. Having to clean up after dirty kids is bad enough. Now, they're all naked and smearing their all around. Hell no. A lot of these answers don't make sense. I mean, you're still going to wear PPE, even if being naked is the norm. For example, not wearing a helmet is the norm, but you're still going to wear one when it is necessary PPE. Also, if being naked was the norm, people won't have the same inhibitions and judgments on naked bodies that they do now. Welding. The UV burns any exposed skin within minutes. Think horrific sunburn, but over your entire body. Then there's the spatter and molten metal going everywhere. Then if we're being strict on the naked thing, lack of a mask means you'd be blind in a few minutes. It's brighter than the sun is in the sky, and the UV again messes with the retinas. Arc eye is god-awful. Most welders only make the mistake of getting it once. We had this question before. In our current society, all jobs, If we lived in a society that normalized nudity, we would still wear clothes, but as a way to protect ourselves primarily. We consider our genitalia and women's breasts as taboo to show in public. This is why we hide them. We can basically walk in public in clothing that hides those that aren't deemed underwear. In jobs that have a constant threat to our body, we would wear clothing that was designed with the work in mind, like we do now. If it's not too dangerous, but we still need a bit of protection, then basic clothes we have will do fine. Kindergarten teacher and a teacher in general. Nursing home assistant. I don't know how you call them in English. Cook, mortician, vet, window cleaner. I guess on those large buildings, it's not a job, but Jehovah's Witnesses that go from house to house would be pretty awful. Priest, nun, whatever has to do with religion. Bartender, plumber, mechanic, pediatrician. Whatever category of doctors, not sure what they're called, but those guys that work in prisons and jails. Gym training instructor. Fifth complete tangent here, but I occasionally have daydreamed about how society would work if nudity was the norm, or if some supernatural event erased all clothes, and pretty much the only way it would work is if protective clothing was allowed. Like could wear shoes, hats, protective gear, etc. Like pretty much if being naked was the normal state and just going out to the store in nice weather in clothes made you look like silly or something. To be fair, I think if it was normal, there wouldn't be negative consequences in social settings. No one would think any differently about it. Does this question completely exclude clothing? Surely you wouldn't expect a fireman to enter a building with no equipment? Skin and fire don't get along very well. How far do we take the question? Just because it's normal to be naked doesn't exactly mean clothing is no longer an option at all. Just my thoughts. Firefighter, and pretty much any job that regularly deals with biological and/or chemical hazards. Also, any job that requires work in climates where inhospitable cold and inhospitable heat are standard conditions. Far north, far south, deserts, etc. Honestly, I'm a bit more curious about what the best jobs would be. Well, the question says the norm and not required, so I take that to mean protective clothing would still be allowed for jobs like firefighting and bacon frying. Wearing hard hats is already not the norm, but it's done where needed. I think the jobs that would be the worst would have to do with which employers are cheap, lazy, and fail to provide appropriate PPE. Clothing is now considered PPE. People not realizing jobs with obvious bodily harm would be wearing protective clothes, even if society seems nakedness the norm. Boyfriend, it's the spirit of what Op was asking for. But I would think a much more interesting way to approach would be, what jobs would maintain the societal norm of nakedness, but would be the worst? Maybe jobs like movers, who would naturally retain nakedness, but have to constantly be using their bodies interacting with, I don't know. Military, park ranger, wilderness first responder, anything that requires you to be in thick brush, stepping on rocks, pushing through thick underbrush, dealing with thorns, risk of animal bites, even minor things like stepping on pine cones or sticks, it would all svic. Those jobs are bad enough with gloves, eye protection, good boots, long pants, and long sleeves. Remove that, and it would be. Working in steel factories, iron ore smelting plants, basically the entire metallurgy industry will be a big hazard. All chemical industries, pharma, and biohazard industries. Also cherry on top, nuclear energy sector. Humongous rate of death. People would be dying on the job. Insurance companies will not exist in any form. Working in steel factories, iron ore smelting plants, basically the entire metallurgy industry will be a big hazard. All chemical industries, pharma, and biohazard industries. Also cherry on top, nuclear energy sector. Humongous rate of death. People would be dying on the job. Insurance companies will not exist in any form. My job, radioactive pharmaceutical manufacturing. We have lots of heavy lead bricks for shielding. We use a lot of harsh cleaners, lots of syringes, and half the time the work is done in a clean room that is nearly sterile. There is always the chance of getting yourself contaminated with radioactive liquid. Some of you live sheltered lives, and it shows. Not seen anyone mention this yet, But where they get separated from the water, there are pumps that pump them. Those pumps sometimes stop working and need to be replaced. That means someone has to wade through all that and take that pump out. That's one of the worst jobs in the world. Imagine doing it naked. You'd probably die pretty quickly, and it must be the worst way to go. Dog grooming. Hair splinters everywhere. Getting a full body mist of dog sebum and hair when you use the high-velocity dryer. Not to mention cuts and scratches and bites. It has to be absolutely unsanitary, and you might leave work with some fleas or ticks yourself. Now, is this the worst job ever? Maybe not. You could do it if you had to, but it's making my eye twitch, so let's just never try it. Any job in a steel mill, unless you are the old guys who sit in the break room the whole shift, was in the industry for a while, and those guys always knew how to never work. My father-in-law is 5 to 10 years from retirement working as a machinist for a place that does exclusively government contracts. Not the same, I'm aware, but I imagine a similar environment. He apparently spends a lot of his day going on walks around the place. Overhead welding. Because your balls aren't going to burn themselves. Y'all need to turn your amperage down or let your weld cool before making another pass. Otherwise, you're gonna be eating lava goobers all day. That takes experience to find that out though. I too have a scar at the base of my dick. Another bad burn story. I was doing overhead and spatter jumped down the back of my neck, rolled all the way down my back and ended up in my crack. Ouch. My favorite burns are when you get spatter in your ear hole. Not a lot of nerve endings in there, so you don't really feel it, but you can definitely hear the hairs in your ear getting burnt though. Sounds like random bacon being cooked next to you. Kids make up stories about teachers' conduct pretty often. A lot of jobs working with children have training sessions to make it as clear as possible that you're keeping the kids at arm's length, so that nobody can accuse you of misconduct. But being naked strips away a layer of protection. Even if we are all accepting of the nudity, we're aware that a principal and a student were both naked in a closed room. It's slightly easier for someone to form the idea that misconduct happened than it'd be if everyone was clothed at the time. This is purely theoretical headcanon, but I disagree. I think this is still viewing it from the viewpoint of the society we live in and how nudity is perceived as itself being Yule. If society didn't have that view, you wouldn't assume naked people in a room were doing something Yule anymore than you would assume clothed people were. I don't think anyone who is not the parent or guardian of a child should be in an excluded, closed room with them anyways. As I got older, have learned way too many stories from others who experienced Yule assault from adults and peers in such situations. But that is a different conversation. You're the 20-something-year-old assistant vice principal for discipline, and all the naughty naked 17-year-old girls are sent to your office. At no point do you wind up in jail or by an angry father. I suppose we'd need to poll the current high school principals on whether they have been desensitized to current Lululemon trends. This will sound controversial, but I'm a woman who worked at a high school for about a year. I have to admit it was honestly disturbing how some, definitely not all, but a significant minority of the boys looked exactly like the ones my age. Really bothered me how many were, well, attractive. Anything that involves stacking. Getting your bellend trapped every time. Don't tell mum I work on the rigs. She thinks I play the piano in a whorehouse, a biography written by a guy working on oil rigs. He talks about a fat white crane operator getting PC with the inexperienced crew he was working with. So he tells one of the guys what button to press when he gives the go-ahead. Walks over to a massive pipe they are trying to put over another pipe. The fat guy manhandles the pipe into place and yells out the go-ahead. So the helper pushes the button and the pipe slips down into place. Big cheer from everyone for Fat Man who just did this hard job all by himself. Fat Man turns around, and his guts fall out of the bottom of his belly that got sliced open when the pipe smashed. Dies in all of a few seconds. That horrifies me. Astronaut, actually, no, not within the ship itself. Spaceships have a horrible time removing excess heat, and the crew compartments often get quite hot. Now, you'd still need amazing and fluffy socks, cause the lower extremities still often get cold due to blood being pumped away from them in expectation of gravity being present. Depends on how you treat your bees. On some days they're calm as a lamb, on others, it's more Silence of the Lambs. But sometimes the wrong perfume or deo are enough to get them wild. But in general, bees are like Switzerland, all fun and gentle, until you seriously piss them off. Then running isn't enough anymore. But nonetheless, you don't want get stung down under. I doubt it feels nice, so wearing a protective thong should be the minimum. It's always a risk, but if you are careful and don't make any mistakes, you are unlikely to get stung. Honeybees do not like stinging things. It's a suicide attack. However, bees care very little for their personal safety. Protecting the hive is the most important thing in their world, and they won't hesitate to lay down their life in defense of the hive. Any loud sounds or aggressive movement can activate their defense response. Wearing brown or black clothes can make them more likely to attack. They think you are a bear. If you accidentally kill a bee by crushing it, the other bees will smell the dead bee and start to get stressed out, and more likely to attack. Don't eat bananas before handling bees, as the bee attack pheromones is very similar to the smell of bananas. Lastly, if you do get stung, leave the area immediately. Once one bee stings, they release attack pheromones, and other bees will come to sting you, releasing more attack pheromones until you either get away or die. Most beekeepers get stung a few times a year on average. Unless you are allergic, the stings aren't very harmful, just painful. But they are working with 30,000 bees per hive, and often have several hives. For hobbyists, commercial beekeepers have hundreds or thousands of hives. So out of a few 100,000 bees, beekeepers are likely to only get stung by a few if at all. Protective gear isn't the norm. You would probably still wear protective gear when needed. Why would that change? It's not normal to walk around in day-to-day life in protective gear. However, when you need it, you put it on. I would certainly envision even with day-to-day being naked as normal, you would still wear Nebikos gear. The military would probably have Budu still, and sewer workers would wear the gear necessary for the job. This would be a fucking terrible job to have if you were naked. All that bacteria and viruses that could end up in you. Especially if your private part was exposed, you would end up with severe infections there, as well as that being a gateway for viruses of all kinds. Plus, you are obviously more likely to get injured easier and even more badly, getting cut or scraped or bruised. Like people don't understand that clothing isn't just a modesty practice, it genuinely aids and protects you from getting harmed badly. All you have to do is watch naked and afraid to know how important clothing is.